Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody, it's Jared. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. Appreciate you being here. It's exciting to be back. I've had a little bit of a hiatus, been traveling an absolute ton. And so apologize, we've missed a couple of weeks, but we are back on track now. And I'm especially excited this morning because I have a guest that is not typical of what we do with All Things Crime, but he is here to represent not only himself, but he's also written a book. So this guy is an author. He is a lawyer and a former California congressman, or so. What do you call it in California, Mike?
So in California, like New York, we call it the state assembly, but
Okay.
It's the House of Representatives for the state. Yeah.
All right. State Assemblyman. Sorry. Butchered that one, but I'm sure everybody will forgive us. So Mike Gatto, pronounce your last name right?
Yeah, Gatto, either one is
Gatto,
fine.
As
long as you're not calling me jerk, I'm okay with it.
Oh man, I'm so out of sorts here. I haven't done any episodes for a while. I'm not kidding. I've traveled probably I was in Europe for 10 days and then it's just been on the road. I'm just exhausted.
Where'd you go in Europe?
I was in Ireland.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. I was went over there for work. So
nice.
Can't talk a ton about it right now, but hopefully when they, if things go the way we're hoping it did, then it'll be announced everywhere. So yeah, it'll be really crazy. So, Mike, appreciate you coming on the show, and let's talk about you, man. You have first of all a very, I don't want to say interesting, but tragic. I don't want to say that either. So why don't you describe your kind of the whole reason that you're on the show and how this thing got started?
Sure. So thank you for having me. First of all, thank you for the introduction. Yes, I was serving in the California legislature. I had a pretty long career in outside of politics, and then I had a decent run of elective office. But we're here to talk about what happened on 11/12/13, November 12, 2013. My father was murdered in a home invasion robbery in the Silver Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles. For people who don't know Los Angeles, Silver Lake is a very safe neighborhood. It's a neighborhood where people, very friendly. There's actually a lake in Silver Lake, if you can imagine, in the middle of Los Angeles. It's a reservoir, but it's nice. It's 2.5 miles around. And, it's a place where everybody kind of knows everybody. People walk, people run, people jog a lot. And my father was murdered that day inside his home, inside his bedroom. My father was a very beloved man. He was an Army veteran. He was a teacher. He founded a school for art in Los Angeles. He was an old Italian man, and kind of everything that implies, right? He was somebody who knew how to grow fig trees and grow all sorts of fruit trees and stuff like that. He could take apart an engine. He could build the furniture with his hands. He could teach art. He knew all these things about art and design. Some of his students designed cars. Some of his students, went on to become sculptors and things like that. He was a very beloved man with no enemies that we knew about, and yet he was murdered in a home invasion in his house.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. How old were you when this happened?
Let's see, 2013. So I had just turned 39, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was probably a little older.
Yeah, he was 78, about to turn 79.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's tragic. And it's amazing how even, 10, 12 years ago, seemingly safe neighborhoods, and it doesn't matter which city I travel to, it seems that crime isn't really centralized in the city part anymore. It's kind of expanding out into the suburbs. And interesting for what I do for with M-Vac systems, we seem to work with the suburbs of large cities nowadays a lot more than even the cities themselves, just because they're trying to get ahead of it and get ahead of this push that the crime as it's expanding out. Because I think, like you said, these safe neighborhoods where people are a lot more relaxed, they're a lot more I don't want to say defenseless, but at the same time, if you're not totally aware of your surroundings and have your head on a swivel, then in many ways you are. And you even talk about like Rachel Morin out in Maryland, the mom of 5 that was jogging. She probably had headphones on, probably been on that trail a million times, and wasn't worried about it. And yet that one day, and I'm sure that's kind of the scenario of what happened to your father. And I really am sorry that happened to you. But
Yeah.
from that obvious tragedy in your life, you wrote a book about it, and one of the primary title is Noir by Necessity: How My Father's Unsolved Murder Took Me to Dark Places. So tell us about why, first of all, how you came up with that title, but second, and more importantly, what are these dark places that took you to?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So the first point that I make is about crime and crime statistics, and one that you brought up. And I just want to go into that really quickly. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, the murder rate is gone down in big cities. And I say, yeah, okay, well, how many murders are too many? Because every single murder tears a family apart. I mean, this one tore my family apart. It really is, when you lose a loved one like that, it's never easy to lose a loved one, right? But when someone gets diagnosed with an illness and, it's a 3-year process, you have time to sit down with that person and talk with them about their life and hold their hand and, usher them to meet their maker in a dignified way, hopefully. But when someone is murdered, right, it's just one day they're gone. With my father, literally the day before, we were having conversations about like the best plumber to use, right? And then all of a sudden he's gone. The other point that I make is crime statistics can lie when it's everything but murder, right? A lot of times now in cities, people don't report crimes because the police don't even come anymore. The police don't even make an arrest. The DA doesn't get a conviction, and so a lot of times you'll have writers be like, well, crime is down, theft is down. And it's like, no. Theft convictions are down. These other quality of life crimes are way up in all cities. And I don't want to hear anything about it because in places like Los Angeles, we know that to be the case. So why did my father's murder, take us to such dark places in my family? Well, aside from losing him far too early, he was a doting grandfather. And, I had 2 daughters at the time, and a son was born after he passed. It really, the frustration with the system and, how things go down can be very difficult. My father's case is a real mystery, right? The initial theory, I should tell your viewers about the initial theory, which went around for many, many years before I started to poke some holes in it. And I think people now see that there's something wrong with it. Well, so first, the initial theory was that my father was killed by the Russian mob. Okay. That was what some neighbors had floated, because my father owned this type of Russian painting. And there was an advertisement that went out a couple of days before he was killed that said, Joe Gatto is going to bring his collection of rare paintings to this place. And their theory, my neighbor's theory, was that, well, gee, someone had seen this and they wanted to steal his paintings and blah, blah, blah. But we quickly dismissed that, the LAPD and myself, because he had these paintings right on his wall and the killer did not take them, right? So if the killer was after these Russian paintings, which were not priceless, they were valuable, but not priceless, it just seems like that was nonsense. The prevailing theory is the one that I think really draws a lot of frustration for me into the way the case has gone down. So there was a lady coming home roughly the same time that my father was killed, a little bit before it. She was coming home from karate. This was right at the time where everybody comes home from work. Silver Lake is built like a football stadium. The neighborhood my dad lived, it's built like a football stadium. You can imagine the lake is the field, and then there's like little like, streets around it that are kind of the seats, and then there's little streets that connect that are like the aisles. My dad's street was an aisle street, 3 houses on it, little short street. So she was driving around one of the upper parts of the bowl, and she saw a young man breaking into cars. This is right at dusk. People are coming home from work. She's coming home from karate class. She sees a guy breaking into cars. The guy's kind of brazen, she says, and he's dressed very nicely, she says. She says he's dressed like a hitman. That was her words, like an Eastern European hitman. At some point, though, she called the neighbor and said, hey, this guy's breaking into cars. And this male neighbor said, hey, what are you doing? And the guy apparently fled to Silver Lake has these walk streets. There's like staircases that are not for cars, but they connect the car streets. So he backed to the staircase and went down it. And it's kind of vague, but apparently he said something to the male like, follow me and you'll die or something like that. But he hopped in, the male neighbor hopped in the car with the mother, and they did follow him. They had to drive, though. They had to drive around the bowl, and they followed him again. And she had her son in the car, who was, I want to say 8 at the time, if I remember correctly. And he's the only one of the 3, of the 2 adults, who saw the guy's face. And he believes that the guy waved a gun. Nobody else was sure. Nobody else was certain. So the police's theory for years was that this was my father's killer. But I want to tell you what they had to get to make this work. So he's seen fleeing down towards my dad's house. So they say, well, let's assume he was right-handed. Right-handed people, when they're running, they tend to turn right. So that would have made him turn toward my father's house. Then they said he probably thought that your dad's street was an alley, and he went down it to try to hide. At that exact moment in time, a tour helicopter was flying to go see the Hollywood sign. This is their theory. This is the police's theory. And he thought it was an LAPD helicopter. And at that exact moment in time, my father, who had purchased a printer at Costco, came downstairs to open up his garage, press the button, had to take the printer out of his hatchback, and the guy ducked underneath the garage right as the garage door closed. Now, they have to explain all these things because there was no forced entry in my dad's home. No forced entry. So what they're essentially saying is, this guy was right-handed. He turned right. He thought this. The helicopter came over. He thought it was this. He ducked underneath the garage door. But here's what's always bothered me about that. You profile this kid. It's a young kid, possibly high on drugs, possibly looking for a next fix. Why does he have a gun while he's breaking into cars? Doesn't really make sense. Why does he not just stick somebody up? This is Los Angeles. You can go on any trail. You can go on any side street, and you can just say, hey, give me your purse if you have a gun, and you'll get your quick fix. The second thing that's always bothered me about that is that for the timeline to work, because my father, the police know that my father was setting up his printer and he was on his email. For the timeline to work for when he was actually killed, this young man would have had to sit in my dad's garage for about an hour. Just sit there. Garage is full of valuables. It's full of cars, full of tools. He could have taken stuff, just pressed the button and walked out, right? Instead, he chose to walk into a 3-story house with 3 cars present. He doesn't know if the entire, U.S. Navy SEALs team is there with my dad. I mean, he doesn't know who lives there, right? But right. This person, apparently, again, according to the police, chooses to walk into an inhabited dwelling, go up to the 3rd floor where my dad is in his bedroom, and just kill him, right? That has been so hard for me to swallow. I just can't accept it. And then there was this big thing where, whoever killed my dad made a big showing about trying to get into some safes. My dad had some safes in his bedroom, and whoever killed him tried to get into these safes with tools that were not appropriate for the task. So this person, it's like you have these traits that are like really stupid, really brazen, but yet here we are talking about the case, almost 12 years later, and this person has not been caught. So it just strikes me like that's very, very, very strange. And when I say brought me to dark places, that's one component of it. It's because when you have an unsolved murder, it drives you nuts thinking of the theories. I mean, I can't tell you how many nights I've lied up at night trying to think about like, this doesn't make sense. Does this make sense? And everything like that. And nothing with my dad's case makes sense.
So, yeah, I mean, the theorizing about the burglar, why, if somebody's just breaking into cars, I mean, I understand your story, and it makes sense that, you know, crimes of opportunity basically pop up all over the place, and it's if that's what it was, but why? Well, let me just ask you some questions about it. Was there any kind of a struggle?
Yes. So my dad did put up some kind of fight. The police let me in on that, you know, after, as the investigation went on a little bit. I don't know if they were worried that I'd be sad about it or something, but it does appear that my dad put up some type of fight. And they base that by the fact that he had some type of, you know, residue or something on his hands or whatever. Did it look like a big fight? No. You know, according to the police, the crime scene was pretty calm. It's not like there was like, you know, like lamps broken and things like that. It looks like they danced around the room for a long time. So, you know, there was some type of limited, you know, pushback or something like that, but that's all that they know.
Well, being the president of M-Vac Systems, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically a really aggressive DNA collection system.
Yeah.
And so if there's, I ask this on every kind of crime scene, because if there's any kind of a sign that there was any kind of resistance or struggle or even touching, our system has been used so many times to collect DNA that other systems just can't do. And so, like, my theory here is that if there's any kind of a struggle, more than likely, especially back then, the chance that like a common burglar would wear gloves is pretty low. And if he didn't, and he grabbed onto any of your, like your father's shirt or whatever he was wearing, then there's a chance that we could get DNA from that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why my team reached out, Jared, and hopefully I can connect you to the detectives who are working my dad's case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, DNA advances keep proceeding, right? And, you know, in 2013 to me feels like yesterday. But what I tell people whenever we talk about my dad's case, in 2013, there was not a single Ring doorbell camera in the neighborhood. And people are like, what? Yeah, those didn't really become a thing until like 2016, 2017, right? And, but, you know, the same thing with DNA. There's a lot of things that proceed. They do have DNA. They have DNA from who they think is the perpetrator. It is tiny, 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 minuscule amounts. There has been no match in Dakotas, right? Which to me, again, is shocking. Somebody who you know, does some of the traits of this profile that we have, right? It would seem that this person would have reoffended or would have had a history. For the timeline to work out, another thing I should have mentioned is that for this person to have sat there and worked on my dad's safes, they would have had to basically sit there and watch him die. Right. And to me, that part has always been kind of hard to accept. My father was killed by one gunshot. The gunshot went in through his abdomen and apparently penetrated his leg, and he basically bled out internally. To me, for somebody to sit there, first of all, after a gun goes off in an enclosed dwelling, very, very loud, and unless you're used to that, that's something that tends to make most people panic. Secondly, to sit there and watch somebody die, you got to be a pretty hardened criminal, right? You got to be somebody who just, you know, you got to be a sociopath, right? And you know, to sit there and, you know, work on trying to get in a safe for an hour, you know, it just, to me, strikes me like the person was either high on drugs or just a complete sociopath, or the entire timeline is wrong. But I would be very, very interested in trying to connect you with the LAPD to try to test some of the various other objects and see if we could come up with something, because that
Oh
could be the
yeah.
break that could make the case.
Yeah. I would love to help any way we can.
Terrific. Sometimes the LAPD can be very parochial, and that's one of the
Yeah.
things that I talk about in my book that is very frustrating. Right. A lot of times I'll be reading the news and I'll read about some small town detectives agency in, South Carolina. And there'll be like, two detectives, and they'll be working cold cases, and they'll reach out to like a DNA expert, and the DNA expert will help them solve the case. And it's like, LAPD does not take that approach at all. It's like they're very insular, and they don't always love the outside suggestions.
Yeah. Well, LAPD is interesting. And it's kind of the feedback we've gotten from agencies like LAPD and NYPD. I'd put them in there, LA County Sheriff, but Chicago PD. It's so interesting. I had a crime scene. I don't know that he was a supervisor, but he'd been around for a long time. And I was talking to him about the M-Vac and our exclusive DNA collection method, and it blew my mind when he said this. He said, "We don't have time for that."
Wow.
And I was like, "What do you mean you don't have time?" And he said, "We are so busy. There are times when they give us basically 2 hours to process a homicide, and then we're on to the next crime."
Jeez.
And so in many jurisdictions, there's so much crime and the crime scene folks and the detectives are so busy that if the crime almost doesn't solve itself, then it's kind of put on the back burner because there's so many coming in. It's just a flood. And, many of these agencies are underfunded. So they have, they're down 700-800 officers. That means they're down on detectives.
For sure.
The whole detective bureau is down. The crime scene folks are, they should have double what they have.
For
And
sure.
it's just kind of the nature of the beast right now. It's unfortunate. And especially for families like yours that, you guys deserve to know. You guys deserve justice, and your father, especially being a veteran, I'm partial to that. Obviously, he deserves to be to have justice, and that's. But in an area like Los Angeles, where there's so much and they're spread so thin, a lot of times they just don't have the resources. So
and that's some of the frustrations that I talked about in the book. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book was not just to give a window into. So I'm fortunate that I have a platform, right? I mean, there's people who will read my book. Briefly, my book was the best-selling political book. It actually bumped Ron DeSantis off for 1 week, which is crazy, when he wrote his book last summer. But I'm grateful that I have a platform, but I know that most murder victims' families don't.
Yeah.
And one of the points I made in the book is exactly what you said. Like, Los Angeles is so busy. There's so many murders and so many things, and they are down officers. And, my father's case was super high profile. I mean, I was chair of the Appropriations Committee, arguably the third most powerful position in the state when this happened. The mayor of LA was a personal acquaintance of mine, and would always asking about my father's case. It was front page news, LA Times. It was nightly news, every single TV station. It's been on Dateline, NBC, all these things. But yet the level of service so this was a metric that I always used when I was in office. Like, if I went to the DMV and they knew who I was, right, and they treated me like dirt, I was like, oh my gosh, how does the public get treated, right? How does just the regular folks get treated if this is how they're treating me? And that is a theme in the book is, for better or for worse, this was a very high profile case. And that arguably means that they wanted to solve it more. And yet, you think about just the average murder victim family where they have no platform. They have none of these this media scrutiny, and how are they getting treated? And the answer has got to be, the answer that you have to conclude is that they're not getting treated that well. And that makes me profoundly sad. And I wrote my book more to give people a sense of how that works than my father's case, because this is one of those things, unless you've gone through it, you really can't understand.
Yeah. Well, some of it's by necessity, but we're all human, and everybody has bad days. And sometimes you're just interacting with a person that's just having a really bad day, but
For sure.
But regardless, every victim deserves justice, and
Yes.
It's unfortunate that far too many, I think, that are in the in the prosecution world, or well, just in the somewhere in the chain in general, they kind of lose focus on where the focus should be, and that's primarily on the victim. And it's being in the forensics part of it, that's one of the things that I see is at times, like people in crime labs, for example, they lose because they're not interacting directly with the victims. There are some, I mean, not a lot, fortunately, but there are some that kind of lose the sight that, ultimately your customer is the victim, and your customer is the public. And those are the people that you should focus on and be in service of first. So first and foremost, it's not, you're not there just to get a job. You're there to actually serve the public, and it's a critical role. And it doesn't matter if it's a crime scene investigator, a detective, or the prosecutor, or the assemblyman that's making the laws, or it doesn't matter. It's all of those
I completely
people.
agree. I completely agree. I mean, I've always been somebody who supported law enforcement very full-throatedly, and I know that law enforcement is just like every other human. There's people who are good, people who have bad days, people in between. That's one of the things I wrote about in the book is I mean, there were some really, really great detectives that I have worked with on my dad's case, and there's some that are not so great. I mean, there was one who he had pulled my dad's call logs, and my dad's mom had a very unique Italian last name. And he said, this last name, why was your dad calling these people? I go, that's his cousin. He said, by the way, are they any related to so-and-so? I said, yeah. He goes, I went to high school with that guy. He's a SOB. I was like, easy, you guys yelling at me about like my second cousin, what he did in high school. Literally, I mean, this guy was in his late 50s. So this is like 40 something years ago. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what this has to do with my dad's case. I'm sorry that one of our cousins, dated your sister 40 years ago. Like, I mean, like literally went on a tirade, this detective with me. I had another one, and this type of thing was common. It's, something that my wife and I laugh about sometimes. But when my wife went into labor with our second one, we were in the delivery room, and the anesthesiologist who was there to give her an epidural, he was like, oh, okay, so how dilated you? Okay, right. It's like, wait, you're Mike Gatto. Oh, you're in the legislature. Oh, he goes, there's a bill that I want to talk to you about this bill. It's AB 715. It would change the rules for this anesthesiology. Blah, blah. And he goes on and on. And my wife's like, hello, I need the epidural, right? And I had a detective when, it was like just a couple days after the murder, and I'm like, I'm wrecked. I haven't slept in days. I'm, driven all the way from the Capitol down to LA. I'm cried a lot. And he starts talking with me about legislation. And it's like, oh my God, and he's like, oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. It's just like, oh my God. Like, so there were definitely some quirkier detectives that I encountered, but the team that's on the case right now is terrific. They are people who I think really care about solving it. The crime scene detectives were terrific. And, it's just like any other profession. There's good and bad eggs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And one of the reasons I brought up that time that I have interacted with some of those CSIs is it's unfortunate that in these super big jurisdictions like LAPD covers, because they are so underfunded, and the focus isn't on actually solving crimes. It's more on just I mean, I shouldn't maybe say that as much as it's not as big of a focus. It's because there's so much crime that happens, even a murder, the high profile murder like what your father, um, it doesn't receive the attention and the focus that it should, and what you would in a smaller community. Because I mean,
Precisely.
I grew up in small town Idaho,
Nice.
and if they have a murder up there, man, it's like,
That's everything, right?
yeah, I mean, the entire city shuts down, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's all hands on deck to get this solved. But um, you know, it's another murder in L.A. So okay,
Yeah.
and I don't want to be calloused about it. And I apologize if that came across wrong, but at the same time, it's just kind of the reality of the situation, and that's it's unfortunate, but it shouldn't be that way. And I think all of us that are in the community, I mean, there's literally hundreds of thousands of dedicated law enforcement officials that when they hear about any kind of a case that it goes kind of to the wayside, especially if it's because of basically nonchalance,
Yeah.
then they just, that's not right, and they're like, we got to fix that. So like I said, if there's anything we can do, and if you said there was some DNA collected, going back to the actual
Yeah.
scene of the crime here, if there's a little bit of DNA collected, there's two things that I would throw out there. Number one is we could go back with the M-Vac, and wherever they collected that DNA from, we can get more.
Oh, that's
And
terrific.
by getting more,
Yes.
now there's a new thing called FIG, and it's the forensics genealogy.
Yes.
And that, when you have a better sample, and that gives you more options of what to do with it, from there you can go into this investigative genealogy steps. And there's so many tools that they've developed now. It's amazing. I mean, that's how they caught the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
And from there, because of all the attention that got, it's just blossomed into this whole side industry in the forensics. Like I go to conferences that are completely dedicated just to forensics genealogy, and so
Yeah.
detectives are getting really smart on it, and everybody's getting spun up on it, and the techniques and everything are getting so good that I think if we could get DNA from your father's clothing and then send that to some of the experts that I know, they'd be able to. I mean, it's crazy. There's this one case in uh, Phoenix that the expert that got the genealogy and started doing going through the tree, not only was able to pin down the suspect's family tree, but actually narrowed it down to the name. And he
Yes.
said, "This is your suspect." And
Yeah.
the detectives were like, "How do I'm just looking for a name." They said, "No, this
Right.
is the person you need to go look for."
Yeah.
And she was right.
Yeah.
And
I am a huge believer in that. That's one of the things that I talk about in the book is I've learned more about, genetics and DNA and genealogy than I thought I'd ever know.
yeah,
And my understanding is in my dad's case, the issue is literally just the amount of DNA, or maybe I guess a secondary issue is that they cannot be sure that the DNA in the room came from the perpetrator, but they have a pretty good idea.
hmm,
Right. And so if you were able to get more, that would tremendously, tremendously help. And, but, I'll tell
yeah,
you, when I've talked with the LAPD about certain of these things before, sometimes they'll say, well, we don't release evidence to a third party. And it's like, well, what does that mean? You're not going to release the evidence. You're going to do it under their supervision. I mean, a lab is
right,
a lab is a lab. And they'll say, well, no, we have an inside lab. And it's just, oh my, I mean, and sometimes the bureaucracy is so difficult
yeah.
to get through. But you know what? I'm going to email the detective and I'm going to copy you. And I'm going to ask. I'm going to stick my teeth into this until this is something that we get a very concrete answer on. Hopefully, a yes.
Well,
Because
that's Can't tell you how many cases we've helped solve because of a family member learning about the M-Vac and forwarding that to the detective, and then they,
Yeah.
they'll know if it's appropriate or not. And I'm always honest with them. Say, you know what, if if the M-Vac isn't the right tool, then I'll tell them. But so many times, especially clothing,
What about
rough
paper?
and porous surfaces like rocks and bricks and crazy things
Paper?
like that. I'm sorry.
Paper?
Paper, not so much, just because it's a wet vacuum. I mean, it sprays a
I
solution
see.
down
I see.
and
Okay.
then vacuums up, whatever's on there. And
I
so
see.
paper, I mean, it has been used, but it's not something that's
Because there's a
done.
perception that the perpetrator touched some envelopes, and
Okay.
if that if that would be something that could be uh, I don't know. Look, it's worth a try. That's my
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's look at all the evidence and see
yeah.
what we can come up with. So
Terrific.
yeah, I'd love to help you.
Terrific.
Yeah. So going to dark places. Now, I think I really want to kind of explore this because I think so many people can relate with what you're saying. When when something horrible happens, I think the natural reaction is to start asking, well, yeah, they go through all these different stages of grief.
Yeah.
And I think one of the stages is the further it goes, when there's no answers. Um,
Yeah.
a friend of mine once, and this guy's like a world-renowned criminal psychologist. He said there's two, um, there's like an X and a Y axis on, especially solving crime. But the X axis, that goes on the level surface is kind of what he calls a sewer, and that's like all the the blood and the guts and the needles and all the garbage that they put up with. And you can kind of equate that to what happened in your father's case. That's there's lots of different, yeah, the struggle and the fact that he was shot and then just basically left there to die, and probably
Yeah.
wasn't even, the guy probably didn't even think twice about helping him, and
Right.
which in itself is horrible. But then on the y-axis, there's, he calls it the, the abyss, and it's kind of the why. There's always a reason why people do things. And well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes there is no why, there is no reason. And so
Right.
when we start trying to understand the why of why something, like your father, why did that happen?
Yeah.
And was the guy just, running around trying to find a quick hit, like as you said, or
Yeah.
was it an actual hit? But not understanding that, um, you can kind of start circling downward and go into this
Absolutely.
abyss. And that's,
Absolutely.
for law enforcement, that's where a lot of this PTSD comes from, is because they're used to dealing with the sewer, but when they start trying to understand why a crime happened, and
Yes.
especially if there is no why, then they're not, it just, nothing makes sense to them. And so everything the sewer becomes even
That's a
more
great point,
enhanced.
Jared, and that's one that I talk about at length in the book. Is my father's case is either something very simple and very tragic, which is that all these things lined up. A woman came home, the guy chose to flee, he was hopped up on drugs, right-handed, helicopter. My dad presses the garage door at the right moment. Decides to sit in the garage. All these things happen, and just a victim of horrible circumstances. And there's really no logical explanation of that other than the guy's high on drugs or something, right? Or there was something way, way, way bigger, right? There was something here at play here where this was either some kind of weird business dispute that went awry, or there's something way, way bigger that is the real story behind my father's case. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. What has been very frustrating for me, and I also talk about this in the book, is I think unlike typical murder, well, there's two traits of my father's case that made it different than the typical case. Number one, I was a very public figure. Like my email address, my phone number. I mean, members of the public could contact me 3 different email addresses, Facebook, it's 2 different phone numbers. It was all public. I mean, elected official, right? That's your job, is to be responsive to your constituents. And the second piece was high profile case. And you combine those 2 things. And I talk about this in the book, is the number of people who would get my hopes up, who would get my family's hopes up, and then crash us down was remarkable. For example, there was a woman that I knew, and she lived in my dad's neighborhood, pretty, maybe 6, 7, 10 blocks away, something like that. But she called me one day and she's like, hey, there's a guy right outside my house. He looks just like the sketch that they circulated of this guy who's breaking into the cars. It's got to be him. You got to send police here, right? So, I like pull over to the side of the road. I call the police, sirens, go out there, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, make a long story short, there was a homeless guy outside her house. She didn't like him. Guy didn't look anything like the sketch. She just wanted a police response to get this guy out of her house.
Away from her house.
I had people call me. There was a somewhat prominent actress who my father had taught. He had founded this art school. So there's a lot of people there who had become famous actors and actresses and musicians. And she calls me and she says, I know who killed your dad. Okay. And she says, come to lunch with me. I don't want to say it on the phone, but I want to share my theory. I go to lunch with her, and she made, for the first 20 minutes, she said enough things that made sense. But then like at minute 21, it spun into like Hillary Clinton and aliens. I mean, it was like way out there stuff. It was like, where, and you understand like what that does to the psyche of the family, right? Because when she calls me and she's like, hey, I've got something I need to share with you, she seems really rational. And she says, I can only do it in person. And that also makes sense. I don't want to do it on the phone. And then the 2 weeks until that lunch comes, your hopes are up. You're like, oh my gosh, this could finally be the lead. This person knows something.
Yeah.
And then you get there and it's just like, it is just so disappointing. And this happened again and again and again and again. You would not believe the amount of leads that I chased down. So yeah, that's another part, I guess, of the dark places that I referenced in the title.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the neighbor with the homeless guy, that's horrible.
Yeah.
A lot of people have good intentions when they do that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's, come on, the whole conspiracy theory that, and the more high profile the case, geez, for example, right now the M-Vac's being used on, and I've done numerous podcasts on the West Memphis 3.
Right.
If you've heard that case, the number of comments that I get on my, especially like my YouTube feed and things like that, it is staggering. And it's like
people with theories, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They are 100% convinced that they are correct.
Yes.
And there are people that there's nothing you can say to them that's going to budge them from whatever. And some are like, no, these guys are innocent. And some are like, they are 100% guilty.
Yeah.
And, my biggest thing is, I don't have a dog in this fight. And I'll tell you, the only thing that I rely on, because I'm not a detective, I wasn't there. I haven't interviewed anybody that was there. I've interviewed guys that are kind of experts on the case, but you know what? The physical evidence is the only thing that you can 100% rely on.
Right.
And that's why that's the area that I live in. And I'm like, look, we've shown time and time again that even people that witness the crime, if you have 10 people that witness the exact same crime,
you'll have 15 opinions.
Yeah. You'll have all these different opinions of exactly what happened. And that's so, even eyewitnesses aren't necessarily reliable, but the physical evidence, DNA, the fingerprints, those kind of things, that's why it's become so much more important in modern day crime solving is, a lot of those things are available now. And because DNA has gotten so good, both in like the collection stage, but especially the capabilities of the labs to process, smaller and smaller amounts. The DNA that they recovered, was that back from 2013?
Yeah, it was back in 2013, and my understanding, and I'm not, I don't know all the details of like how this works, but my understanding is they save the physical objects for years, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
how, like, in
Oh,
these cases, like
yeah.
they'll have a
Yeah.
cigarette butt from the 1960s, and they'll get DNA,
Yep.
which because of technology. So
No,
I'm hoping.
homicide, like your father's, 100%. That evidence is still in their evidence room.
Terrific. That is good to know.
Yeah.
So,
And
I'm hoping that there could be something that breaks the case wide open, because the other thing is my dad's peers, they're passing away. I mean,
Mhm.
he was a 78-year-old man in 2013, and his close relatives, my his close cousins, my cousins once removed, and his friends and the people that were at his age group, they're passing away, and I'd love there to be some degree of answers and justice before all this time passes on. And aside from just my family wanting the answers, I think there's a lot of other people out there who want answers as well.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Like I said, there's resources down there. LAPD, they don't have our technology yet, um, which still kind of blows my mind. But like I said, a lot of the big cities, their police departments are stretched so thin that these guys are they're literally running from crime scene to crime scene, and it's crazy. The mid-sized one, the suburbs, those kind of, they're the ones that can actually a lot of times take the time and put the resources toward solving cases on a regular basis, and that's they stay way ahead of it. So yeah.
For sure.
Well,
I mean, just for people to understand the clearance rate, which is a euphemism for how many murders are actually solved. The clearance
right.
rate, I want to say, in LA County, LA City, it's somewhere between 55 and 60%. What that means, of course, your viewers probably know this, is that 40 something percent of families like mine,
Yeah.
they never find out what happened. That to me is unacceptable. I mean, it's unacceptable for me. It's unacceptable for all the victims that I've gotten to know during the last 12 years. It's just having, people use the term closure. Look, closure doesn't bring back my dad. It doesn't bring back my children's grandfather.
Yeah.
But closure, there is a part of me that still gets up in the middle of the night. There's some nights, and there's a part of me that just feels like my life can't move on until I know what happened. And that is so, so important. And then there's this push for justice, right? I mean, you know, you want the person who did this heinous crime to be brought to justice. That's how the world should work, right?
Yeah.
So it's not easy.
Now, personally, I don't think, I think closure is a myth.
Yeah.
And especially because the wrong that your family has experienced can never be made right.
Yeah.
There can be justice if the person is eventually caught, but
Yeah.
that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't bring your dad back. And
Precisely.
um, you know, I kind of know what you are kind of going through. My dad died of brain tumor 15 years ago, and and so he was kind of stolen from us. But
Yeah.
it's not the same, because we had a little bit of time with him, and like you said, your dad, one day you're talking to him about, I don't know, fishing trips and things like
Yeah.
that, and then the next day he's gone, and it's just whack. It's like that
Yeah.
kind of a sledgehammer that comes down onto your life. It just can't be replaced. But it doesn't really matter how heinous the crime is. You can be assaulted. You can be, some of these victims that are carjacked, um, rape victims, the whatever
Sure.
traumatic event that they encounter, they can never be made whole from that. And because that thought and that memory is always going to be there. And to me, it's just, the only thing that you can actually really hope for is justice. And like I said,
Precisely.
your family deserves that, and so does your dad. So,
Thank you.
um, you know, again, I am really impressed. I've been working in this field for 13, 14 years now, and I'm yet to really run into more than a fraction of a percent of law enforcement and other people that work in this industry that don't really care. I mean,
Yeah,
they really want to help solve cases and bring justice to families like yours. And so, to me, that's one of the that's why I think it's one of the most noble professions out there. But um,
absolutely.
so I'd
Absolutely.
love to, like I said, I'd love to help any way we can.
Terrific. Well, I will take you up on that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that there are people like you who are going out there and developing new technologies and new techniques and new methods and new products that can help families like me. Because, as you noted, the days of like detectives, especially in big cities, going out there and interviewing people and waiting for somebody to slip up and talking with everybody and Sherlock Holmesing it, those days are gone. Most detectives in big cities rely on physical evidence, but then the question becomes, what are we doing to make sure that the physical evidence is processed, that it's
Hmm.
handled right, and that we're using all available technology? And so I'm really glad to hear about the M-Vac system, and I'm hoping that the LAPD will consider it. And if they can't give some of the evidence to you underneath their supervision, then maybe they'll buy a system or something and put it to good use here in the city. Because look, this is a big city. There's a lot of people who
Yeah.
unfortunately are in a position like mine. And if this could solve some murders and some rapes, I mean, that's what we're all here for, right?
Oh yeah. Well, that helping solve some major cases, I'd guarantee that one.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I think even the crime lab, their technology and their processes are so much better. If something honestly has not been processed in the last 5 years, I would consider it not processed at all,
Huh. That's
just
amazing.
because it is so much better than it used to be, even back, so now you're talking 12 to 13 years from back when your father was murdered. Yeah, that's it should absolutely be processed again. So
Yeah.
one last question for you, and let's try to put this in a positive note here.
Sure.
Um, how have you continued to be uh, a prosperous, functioning human being, even after going through such a horrible experience with your father being murdered?
Well, thank you. So for the first couple of years, I think it was hard. I think the first couple of years after it, I had a little bit of the YOLO, what they call the YOLO streak, where I probably was like too focused on like living life and like let's have this experience. And I probably I won't say I drank to excess, but like I was definitely very much like living in the moment. Like, hey, life is short. Like let's do this, let's do that, let's do that, right? Then there's also the first couple of years where there was a really horrendous battle about my dad's estate. Look, he was a retired teacher. He had a modest estate, but there was still a horrendous battle with some of my relatives. His affairs were not in order because the killing was so sudden, and so there was all sorts of lack of clarity, and then just processing the whole thing. Dealing with the police and the media, and helping with the civil part of his estate. I mean, literally for I would say at least 3 years it took to get back to normal. But the biggest way that I felt like I had returned somewhat to normal is in 2013, we had a son. My dad loved kids. He loved them. He loved grandchildren. And it was sad that my son was born after he passed. But there's a tradition in Italy, which is you name the firstborn son after the father's father. It was way before birth certificates where you could trace genealogy really easily. And so we named my son Joseph Michael. He goes by Jack because we have a lot of Joeys and Joes in my family. But my son came out with blonde hair, and he's just a beast of a kid. But he's got a lot of the personality traits of my dad.
Mm.
He loves fruits and he loves football. And there's just certain things that remind me of my dad and my son. And I felt like when our son was born in 2017, like I had somewhat continued to like pass on some knowledge and things like that. Also, my oldest daughter, her name is Elle. She was the one who actually interacted with my father. Our middle daughter was still really young, and obviously our son was born after. But our oldest daughter, Elle, she has tremendous art skills, and she also cares about the case being solved. And so in her, I feel this tremendous bond where she actually knew my dad like I did. She met him, she interacted with him. And so really it's with my children that I feel like I have to move on. I have to be strong. I have to continue these things. It took 3 years, but here I am and my kids are here and we're doing our best.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Kids, kids can drive you crazy, but at the same time, they're kind of your lifeline to
Yes,
just knowing that they're carrying on your legacy, and
for sure.
they're, yeah, just endless sources of joy at the
They
same
are my
time.
everything. It's the whole
Yeah.
reason that I exist. I mean, but yeah, carrying on my dad's legacy through scholarships and through my children, that has been a very rewarding thing.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing this story with us, and hopefully some people can definitely relate to it. But for sure, everybody that's listening, get this book. It is called Noir by Necessity: How My Father's Unsolved Murder Took Me to Dark Places. And
And I would ask, listen, I should have mentioned this earlier. I laid out the book in chronological order as I learned every clue. One of the other reasons I wrote it is because I know there's people out there who pride themselves in being able to solve things. If you got ideas, legitimate ideas, let me know. Read the clues, read everything. Please share with me your thoughts.
oh, yes, but absolutely. Let me, and just to maybe give you a little more hope, I'll tell you this scenario. I think it's fantastic because there's an actual lady in California who. Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit, and I'll make this quick. There's a woman in from Ohio. She's originally from Mexico. She's married this guy in Ohio. She disappears. Well, around the same time frame, in southern Utah, down, I don't know if you know where Lake Powell is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, just maybe 50 miles north of Lake Powell. It's middle of the desert, basically, on a small road. A couple of guys that are coming up from, they just finished fishing at Lake Powell. They're driving up this road and they look over and they see this roll. It looks like a carpet roll. And they stop. They said that looks just really weird. So they stop and look at it, and it turns out there's a body in there.
Eesh.
And so of course, the cops all come, and eventually the special bureau from the Utah State Bureau takes over the investigation, and they have this victim. It's a young lady. She's Hispanic. And she's they can't identify her though, so she's a Jane Doe. She's a Jane Doe for 20 years.
Jeez.
And in the same time period, this case in Ohio is a missing person for 20 years.
Wow.
Now, you talk about little thin threads, and I like to think of it as sometimes even divine inspiration.
Yes.
Within a week of each other,
Wow.
the detective in Ohio put out a picture just on the internet and said, "This is a Jane Doe. Does anybody know who this woman is?" Or I'm sorry, that's what the Utah Bureau did. They said, had a picture postmortem of this victim and said, "We don't know who this lady is. Can anybody help identify her?"
Wow.
Within a week of that, the Youngstown, Ohio detective had put out a picture of the victim who was living, said she's still missing. We still have no idea where she is. Her family doesn't know where she is. Does anybody know where she is? A lady in California she does all this research. She sees both those pictures and
Wow.
she thinks, I think that's the same lady.
Wow.
So she contacts the detective in Ohio and says, hey, I think I know where this lady might be. And so they all get together, and it turns out that's her.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Citizen sleuthing, that has a value. It absolutely has a value.
100%.
Wow.
And so I think you're 100% right to call on the public and say, you know what? Somebody out there knows something.
Yeah.
And it's been long enough that, things change, circumstances change, people talk.
Yes.
And say, if anybody has ever heard anything about, this case, then, please contact. Yeah. Do you have a specific website or something that people should go to?
I mean, look, they can always email me, mike@mikegatto.com. There's an LAPD We Tips hotline, but, make sure you copy me. I mean, I'll make sure it gets to the right detective. I don't want to give out his personal email address on the air, but,
of course.
But we appreciate all tips.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us that email address one more time.
So it's mike@mikegatto.com.
Mike@mikegatto.com.
Nice and easy.
I absolutely appreciate you coming on and telling your story. And Mike, let's get together and put our heads together, and hopefully we can talk to this detective and see what we can do to help you guys out.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.